Today I want to talk about something that I think is commonly overlooked in the discussion surrounding amp modeling, and that is how powerful they can be to the user as an educational tool, as a learning tool. So I think a lot of the benefits of amp modelers are pretty well established, whether it be a Line6 unit or a fractal unit or a head rush or quad cortex. Everyone kind of has their variety that they like, and that's great. This kind of applies to all of those, and we know why amp modelers have become so successful, right? You got Mesa Boogie sounds, you got Fender sounds, you got Marshall sounds. It's lightweight, it's portable, it sounds the same every time. You don't have to worry about weird noise from stages and all that stuff. It's your rig in a box, right? That was kind of what everyone wanted, and now we have it. But I think this conversation about using it as an educational tool is often overlooked. So to give a little background, if you follow this channel for a while, you know that I'm a Line6 Helix user. I've had one for probably 6 years now. It's one of the most important musical purchases I've ever made. And part of the reason for that, just to give a little backstory, is when I first purchased the Helix, I was just kind of starting to get into trying to play music professionally. So I didn't have a ton of what you would say background knowledge when it came to building tones or learning how recording systems and recording processes worked, and I didn't really know what compressors did or how to use an EQ pedal. And part of that was just I'd never owned a lot of this equipment. I never owned studio rack-mounted gear, rack-mounted compressors, all that stuff. And lo and behold, I buy this Helix, and there's all this stuff built into it, and I have, at the time, no idea how any of it works. I guess what I want to say is when I first got the Helix, I wasn't expecting the education that came along with it. I guess you could almost call it like an accidental education in a good way. I was just expecting, right, I have access to all these amp sounds now that I want to use, and maybe access to some modulation pedals or some delay pedals that I wouldn't have otherwise had in just like my compact pedal board pedal. But yeah, you start diving into the Helix and you get all these parameters that all of a sudden I realize I don't know what this does. I don't know what the Q control does on an EQ pedal. I don't know what knee is, Knee, on a compressor. What is threshold on a compressor? And it got to the point where I realized I can't ignore this forever. I have to figure out what some of this stuff does. And that started kind of a two-part learning process for me. On the one hand, I had to just go and get the actual objective knowledge. I Google this stuff like, how do compressors work? How does an EQ pedal work? You watch some videos or whatever, and you learn about this stuff from an objective side, but it also really forced my ears to develop. A lot of these parameters, as you shift them, the differences you're hearing are pretty subtle, just by nature of it. And you are kind of forced to develop your ear in a sense and say, okay, I can actually tell now, yeah, like this is a more compressed sound than what I was hearing. Or yeah, this EQ pedal, when I adjust this range within it, I can really tell that it's cutting out this frequency or adding this frequency. And that took a bit for my ears to be able to actually interpret what it was I was doing. And if I had just been sticking with kind of my classic tube amp with a pedal board in front of it, I don't think I would have ever really developed that side of my hearing like I did when I was forced to come to terms with all the stuff that was built into the Helix. Now I think within the spectrum of users who are getting these amp modelers, to begin with, I realized it's not maybe a beginner's tool, right? Like a lot of these, the introductory price or the price of entry is like $1,200 to $1,600. The new Helix stuff that they're putting out is going to be close to $2,000. So it's not maybe the best thing for a beginner. I think it is beneficial to start with an actual amp, learn just a little bit about how an amp's going to interact with your guitar in a room before you dive into amp modeling. But within the people who do then move on to get these maybe more professional modeling platforms, right, like Axe FX or the Quad Cortex or the Helix here, I think you kind of you have two extreme camps, and then everyone fits in the middle, right? On the one hand, you have people who just want to plug it in, have the presets that are built in with it, maybe purchase presets online, and then they don't want to tweak with it, fiddle with it at all. And then on the other extreme, you have the people who spend hours analyzing every single little detail and building out crazy presets with all these massive signal chain things, and those people know who they are. I think most of us kind of fall somewhere in the middle of that, right? And I would say if you're on the one side where you just want to use the pre-built presets and download stuff, you're kind of missing out on a lot of this. The musical education that you get from really diving into this stuff, even though it's just a digital piece of gear. I know you're not manually turning knobs like you would on an actual pedal. You're not actually hearing an amp in the room, right? Those are some of the common complaints about these things. But if you really dive into what all the different controls do, or all the different parameters do, what does sag do on my amp? What is it when, what does this bias control do that they have on every one of the amp presets? Learning about microphones, right? There's 12 different microphone options. Like all of a sudden you're trying to figure out the difference between a condenser microphone and a ribbon microphone, and what the audible differences are, and whether it's close to the speaker, whether it's further away from the speaker. If you don't take the time to mess with all this stuff on your own, you're missing out on a huge benefit from these amp modelers. And I know maybe it's not practical in the sense that you're never going to find yourself in a studio where you're messing with actual $4,000 ribbon mics and trying to set up a live rig to record. But I think there is a huge value in doing this stuff because it lets you accurately create what it is you want to hear in your head, right? You have a sound you're going for, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, it's just a little bit too bright, or I don't like this frequency, or I think this part of it is too muddy. Instead of just throwing your hands up, all of a sudden you're like, you know what? Moving the mic in front of this, I think will solve this problem if we just move it a little bit further away from the center of the cone. The other thing that amp modeling kind of accidentally taught me was a decent amount of audio engineering. Now, I'm not going to say I could go out and mix front of house for a band, but when it came to the difference between mic signals and line signals and instrument signals in different sends coming from the board, and what an input pad was, and how to adjust input gain versus output gain, gain staging, not within just like overdrive pedals, but within a series of signals, then moving that forward to either a recording platform or to a front of house board. I kind of had to learn all that on the go as I did this stuff. I didn't have any idea how any of that worked prior to getting the Helix. Before that point, I'd always, for live gigs, just put a microphone in front of an amp, and you give an XLR to a front of house guy, or if we're running our own sound, right, you plug in that to your board, and there you go. But the times that I would take a Helix to a gig instead of an actual amp setup, all of a sudden I had to be accountable for why the signal's too hot or why the signal's not hot enough. And I know on the fly that might be a stressful thing, but looking back, that was valuable for me because it taught me a lot about live sound, just as far as strength of signals go. Now, I know we all have our opinions of whether or not we like or dislike amp modeling, but I think it's a valuable part of the conversation to just address how much using these modeling platforms can make us not just better guitar players, but better musicians. I think ultimately one of the huge unspoken benefits is how much more aware they can make us of how the sound actually works. So my tip to you, if you're using modeling already, would just be to take a little bit of extra time, dive into those parameters that you normally skip over, really dig into this stuff and embrace it and use it to learn about guitar, the history of these amps, how signal chains work, what all the different effects actually do, how they build on each other, where they're normally supposed to go in a signal chain, why people put them where they do in a signal chain. All that stuff is available to us. We just have to kind of take a little bit of extra ownership for ourselves and like take the time to look this stuff up and really get into why it works. So yeah, really take the time to mess around with these parameters. Don't just get some pre-built presets and off you go. I think you're doing a disservice to yourself if that's all you're using this stuff for. The final takeaway I would say if you're new to amp modeling is don't be overwhelmed by all the options. There's a ton of stuff in these units, and it can definitely be be overwhelming. So I think a lot of people too kind of use that as a turn off and just say, you know what, I'm just going to go with the pre-built stuff. There's too much, I have option paralysis and I don't even want to mess with it. I would just say start simple, right? You got an amp, you got a cab, maybe add 1 or 2 blocks and just mess with those. You don't have to dive into all of this all at once. Just pick a few things at a time and just take the time to really dive into those. And you know, you add stuff and then you realize looking back 6 months, a year later, that you've learned a ton about how all this stuff works. And it just seems a lot more approachable that way than trying to use everything all at once. So that's all I got for today's video. Let me know below in the comments if you've had any major breakthroughs from using these amp modelers, or if you think that the education that kind of comes alongside of using them, if you think that's been valuable. I'm definitely curious to know other people's thoughts on this. Yeah, just drop them below. Thank you as always for watching. I appreciate all the love here on the channel. And cheers, we will see you in the next video.